Welcome to Washington State University's Hazing Prevention Training. The intended audience for this training are our new Cougs starting in the fall of 2022 or the spring of 2023. We will also make this training available to families of Cougs on our website. The state of Washington prohibits hazing by law. Codified in the Revised Code of Washington, or RCW, hazing is defined on this slide here. Hazing includes any act committed as a part of a person's recruitment, initiation, pledging, admission to, or affiliation with a student organization, athletic team, or living group, or any pastime or amusement engaged in with respect to such organization, athletic team, or living group that causes or is likely to cause bodily danger or physical harm or serious psychological or emotional harm to any student or other person attending a public or private institution of higher education or other post-secondary educational institution in this state, including causing, directing, coercing, or forcing a person to consume any food, liquid, alcohol, drug, or other substance which subjects the person to risk of such harm regardless of the person's willingness to participate. Hazing does not include customary athletic events or other similar contests or competitions. Not only is hazing prohibited by law, but the law also outlines and indicates possible penalties for those who participate in hazing activities. Not only could you as an individual student be held liable, but the organization that engaged in the hazing could be, as well as any other affiliates such as a corporation or a living group or association that may also be involved with the organization that engaged in hazing. The Revised Code of Washington goes on to indicate that any individual who participates in hazing shall forfeit their entitlement to state-funded grants, scholarships, or awards for a period of time determined by the institution of higher education. This is more commonly known as financial aid from a state level. In addition, the organization or association or student living group that has permitted hazing shall be immediately subject to loss of recognition by the university. In other words, there are penalties both within the law and within the university for engaging with hazing. The slide here indicates specifically what is required by law. This is the minimum requirement, not the maximum. Not only is hazing prohibited by Washington state law, it is also directly prohibited by Washington State University community standards. All students are required to abide by the standards of conduct for students set forth in the Washington Administrative Code. The provision on hazing you can see on the slide here. Again, we emphasize that regardless of the person's willingness to participate, hazing is prohibited. Examples of hazing can include, but are not limited to, abuse of alcohol or other substances during new member activities, striking another person, whether by use of any object or one's body, creation of excessive fatigue, physical and or psychological shock, or morally degrading or humiliating games or activities that create a risk of bodily, emotional, or mental harm. Hazing does not include things like regular practices or training or conditioning for athletic teams or other customary athletic events or intramural sports and clubs.
This slide shows the many examples of hazing. Intimidation. Intimidation can include deception, assigning detriments, silence periods with implied threats for violation, socially isolating new members, demeaning names, and expecting certain items to always be in one's possession. Harassment. Examples of harassment include verbal abuse, threats or implied threats, asking new members to wear embarrassing attire, skit nights with degrading or humiliating acts, sleep deprivations, and sexual simulations. Violence. Violence can include forced consumption of alcohol or drugs, physical fatigue, beating, paddling, or other forms of assault, branding, forced ingestion of vile substances, water intoxication, abduction or kidnapping, and sexual assault. While there are many examples of hazing, as you can see here, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many impacts of hazing on victims. This can include sleep problems, including insomnia, difficulty forming relationships or trusting others, decreased self-esteem and self-efficacy, depression, anxiety, and self-harming, loss of sense of control and empowerment, lower grades and poor performance in classes, problems in relationships with friends, significant others, and family, post-traumatic stress syndrome, a loss of interest in being part of organizations, illness or hospitalization because of psychological or physical illness and/or injury, and in the most devastating of cases, death. There are also many negative impacts of hazing for those who choose to haze. This can include deterioration of relationships with friends, significant others, and family, a loss of connection to alums through the organization, scrutiny from local and national media, damage to personal reputation, a distorted sense of leadership, feelings of disgrace and guilt, and financial strain as the result of a lawsuit. In addition to negative impacts on individuals, the impacts of hazing also affect organizations negatively. This includes a loss of reputation within the campus community, the local area, and on a national scale. Civil damages may be levied against the organization. Organization's officers may be held responsible. A gradual loss of the true meaning and values of the organization. Difficulty recruiting to the organization, and damage to the reputation of other similar organizations. There are many healthy alternatives to build community for Washington State University students. This can include supporting a local charity, having the entire organization dress up for an event or an away game, participating in a cross-mentoring program with local schools, participating in a community service project, or activities or group trips provided by trained facilitators. This slide shows 3 examples of prevention and intervention strategies. Example 1, organization or team student leadership can emphasize anti-hazing values by modeling healthy community building and reiterating WSU policies. Example 2, student leaders can connect with professional anti-hazing experts to provide in-depth training. Example 3, members can engage in active bystander intervention should they become aware of planned hazing, speaking up and letting others know these behaviors are not okay.
Now that we've shared what hazing is and how you can identify it, now we're going to move on to talk about how you can report hazing should you become aware of something at Washington State University. WSU requires that most employees report to the university should they become aware of hazing behaviors. Employees that must report include faculty, staff, instructors, administrators, student employees, and volunteers. These employees must report to the WSU Center for Community Standards if they become aware of hazing. Their report must include any incident in which the mandated reporter has a reasonable cause to believe hazing has occurred, and reasonable cause is defined as a person who witnesses hazing or receives a credible report alleging hazing or planned hazing activities. There are some university employees that are not required to report, and these include our medical staff and confidential employees such as counselors at Cougar Health Services. As a student, you are very welcome to connect with us directly if you choose to report any violations of our standards of conduct for students, inclusive of hazing. You can report these violations on our website or by coming in to meet with us in person. If you are at a WSU location outside of Pullman, please use our online form, or you can call us at the phone number listed on this screen. If you choose to report alleged violations of hazing, the university has an obligation to take action. That action can include an immediate investigation. It can also include interim action or interim measures that helps us keep our community safe while we are investigating the situation. If your report has something to do with sexual assault, harassment, or discrimination, you may also report directly to our Compliance and Civil Rights Office. The Compliance and Civil Rights Office here at WSU works with students, faculty, staff, or anyone who has a complaint related to civil rights. We use a policy here at WSU called Executive Policy 15 to cover our anti-harassment efforts. You have options to report outside of WSU as well. If there is someone in immediate danger and their health and safety is at risk in an emergent situation, please call 911. If you would like something to be reported, but you're not really sure if it's an immediate emergency, you can contact the Pullman Police Non-Emergency Line at 509-332-2521, or the WSU Police Non-Emergency Line at 509-335-8548. If you're at another WSU campus, please contact your local police department and they can assist you. You also have the option to report to a local or national fraternity or sorority organization's headquartered office. Most organizations have a governing body, and you can connect directly to that governing body. This also may be true for sports teams. Before we discuss anonymous reporting options, I do want to note that if you choose to report to a fraternity or sorority, local, national, or international headquarters, that organization, by law, also has an obligation to share those findings directly with Washington State University. Let's move on to anonymous reporting. If you choose to report anonymously to the university, you may do so through the Center for Community Standards on our website. There's an online form where you can make a referral. Anonymous reporting does limit our university's ability to investigate the incident, so it's our strong preference that you provide some sort of information such that we can contact you back. Oftentimes we have additional questions about what's occurring, and we want to make sure we can do our best to keep our community safe and healthy. It's important to Washington State University that students have the opportunity to come forward and share information without fear of going through the conduct process themselves. We operate under two amnesty options here at the university. The first is codified in law and states that if you make a reasonable report of hazing, in good faith, you may not be sanctioned or punished for the violation of hazing unless you were personally directly engaged in the planning, directing, or act of hazing. We also use a Good Samaritan guideline for the university that applies beyond hazing. We want you to seek help for yourself or for a friend if you believe that there has been a dangerous situation created, if there's alcohol or drugs involved. Most of you who are viewing this training will be under the age of 21, which means you cannot use alcohol or cannabis products or any other drug here at the university or in the state of Washington. We understand that you might need to seek help in a situation where you're conflicted about what to do because substances may have been in the picture. Our Good Samaritan guideline asks you to come forward and seek help as a first priority rather than worrying about whether or not you may be in trouble. If you do seek help, we exercise our Good Samaritan guideline to ensure that we work first from a health and safety perspective rather than looking at whether any alleged violations occur. This Good Samaritan guideline applies to situations involving general health and safety, sexual violence, or hazing, and beyond. All of the information that you've learned so far should lead you to one conclusion, which is we do not accept hazing here at WSU.
There are two processes for investigations at Washington State University. The first is the individual community standards process for individual students. This may include organization officers and any organization member that has an alleged violation against the standards of conduct for students. The second is the group accountability community standards process for organizations. This includes any registered student organization, community living group, fraternities and sororities, athletic teams, or club sports. Individual and group rights and responsibilities. Washington State University students and groups have many rights and responsibilities throughout the investigation process. This includes sharing your experience, having available resources such as conduct advisors, information sessions, and accommodations, expecting a fair and equitable process, and we want students to know that they are free from retaliation and/or harassment for participating in the community standards process. This slide shows some of the essential steps taken throughout the investigation process. A meeting between you, a conduct officer, and potentially a local or national organization staff member. You will be asked about your experience with the organization and about the allegations. Information gained will be used to determine the appropriate next steps. You can answer all, some, or none of the questions you were asked, and Washington State University cannot make assumptions about your involvement based on what information you choose to share or to not share. You can also provide a written statement in addition to or instead of attending your investigative meeting.
It's important for you to understand what exactly group accountability constitutes here at WSU. We hold a group or student organization, team, or living group accountable for its behavior collectively if any of the following are true. The organization or its officers should have foreseen that behavior constituting a violation was likely to occur, yet failed to take reasonable precautions against such behavior. A policy or practice of the organization was responsible for a violation, or the behavior constituting a violation was committed by, condoned by, or involved a significant number of organization officers, members, or guests. The final step in the community standards process after a hearing has occurred based on all of the information is to assign sanctions if you are found responsible or if the organization is found responsible for any violations of our standards of conduct for students. Some of these outcomes can include, but are not limited to, loss of state-funded grants, scholarships, or awards as required by state law. You could be required to create an educational project or write an educational paper. You could be placed on probation and you'd be required to include a probation statement. You could be suspended from the university for a minimum of 1 semester, or you could be expelled from the university, which means permanent separation from WSU. For student organizations, our minimum sanction is a loss of recognition. That means that organization cannot operate at the university under the auspices of the university for the period of time designated. There would also be additional conditions to return to campus. On this slide, you can see some of the resources we used to present this information to you today. Please review them at your leisure. This training will be made available on the Washington State University website should you wish to revisit it in the future. Thank you for your time and attention, and we appreciate your efforts in preventing hazing at Washington State University.